smart when I'm making it many. Matter of fact, I'm feeling like a dirty Mercedes. Open the belly, I'm sipping some Henny. In the illa bottle, I feel like Aristotle.
I'm dropping like it's hot, not Lil Wayne. But after that, getting the car, I'm insane. Insane like a mid-brain, like Beeville. Everybody getting the flow, so real. Looking like an angel. Thank you, word you, praise you. That's what I mean. Everybody getting the moves, I knock you. Anywhere you pass, as hot as I'm in the mood.
Flow, economical, no flow, I'm logical. Making y'all niggas understand my outfit. Hotter than tropical, straight up impossible. Doesn't stop the flow, that's straight up unstoppable.
You know I gotta get this rap, I'm not sucker. And the maniacs that had to warn a brother. That's what I mean, the balls, I gotta yakko, wacko. In the docker for the jackal.
University, feeling like I was Sony. This is the reason why the government control me. Hold this and mold this, I come when I'm flowing. Flow right now when I'm feeling so low.
Like insane with a mid-brain in the vein. Yeah, ain't that picky in the brain. Already know, let me get the dough. Like SWB, like a freaking sword.
Make that niggas understand about the other type of second.
Hello, viewers. Welcome back. It's James Kalm, your half-assed reporter, the guy on the bike. Here's a shout out to our friends on the left coast. We're going to run in here to James Fuentes, 55 Delancey Street, and take a look at an exhibition by Jane Dickson, and the title of the show is All That Is Solid Melts Into Air. Well, this is a very impressive show of Jane's work, and I believe a lot of this is, maybe most of it, is from the 90s. This piece is titled Mother and Child. This is from 1985, oil stick on linen. Well, this is extremely timely, although this is, at this point, 30 some odd years ago. It was only last week that a young mother was taking her child down some stairs in the subway, and she tripped and fell, and I guess she died. So some things never change. Jane really has been rediscovered, and well, I remember when I first moved to New York, I was living not that far away from Times Square, and sometimes in the evenings, if I was suffering from painter's block, I would go down and catch a movie or just check out the action. And about this same time, Jane and her husband Charlie, and I think Charlie's brother John Ahern, were involved with a group called Collab, and they were beginning to organize something that became the Times Square show. And they went into a former massage parlor and had a huge group show, and I remember walking down there one sunny afternoon and going inside, and they had a little part of the show where they had blackboards, and they asked people to come in and make some sketches, and I ran in and did some quick drawings on the blackboard, and they ended up being photographed by the reviewers for, I believe it was Art in America, so that was my first exposure. This piece is titled Nathan's 43rd Street. It's 1984 to 86, oil and canvas, 66 by 78. I think Jane also has done a great job with this technique of kind of painting on a nubby black ground, and then a lot of this is oil stick kind of scumbled in on top. But I think she's done a great job of like selecting very nice, simple subjects that she can boil down and really give you a simple, bold image. It's called Bus Stop Boy 2 1984, oil stick on canvas. And I think Jane had a studio down there around Times Square. And there was a little group of other artists that were also working there. And, well, as I said, the Times Square show was a real harbinger of a whole thing that ended up happening in the 80s with the beginning of the East Village scene. Well, I was just talking to this dude right here, Bobby G, who is one of the founding members, I think, of Collab. And, well, it's very appropriate that we're looking at this one. He was saying that he went to a panel discussion, I believe, at the Museum of the City of New York. And Jane and maybe the producer or the director of a TV show called The Deuce were discussing the fact that, and The Deuce is about Times Square and the porn business in the late 70s, maybe the early 80s. And I think that maybe the producers and some of the set designers and the dramaturges were looking at Jane's images and sort of saying, this is the kind of feeling that we like. This is titled Big Peepland 2016. Now, if you want to follow Jane, I believe she's on Instagram and her hashtag is, I believe, Jane in Peepland. This is titled Dream 1, 2018, oil stick on linen. So this is probably within the last 6 months. And here Jane is working on a kind of a terracotta red ground and then building up her blacks on top of that. But I'm sure that she probably is working from photos or drawings or sketches that she did years ago, and probably has a wonderful archive of images. This is titled Peep 7, 1992 to 1996. So Jane worked away on this for 4 years at least, maybe on the theme. This is a little different. She's looks like she's added some kind of grit into the ground. Oil and pumice on canvas. And as I said, I used to go down to Times Square myself, and well, it was its whole own little sleazy world. Lots of porn shops and adult bookstores. Whole string of movie theaters that were running triple features. I would often go down there and sit and watch one or two movies late at night. During the winter, there were a lot of people who would actually go in there and stay stay in the theaters just to stay warm. And I would sit in there late at night. There'd be maybe a dozen people in the theater, and I would watch people creep in on the sides and sneak up behind the people who were asleep and try to pick their pockets. This piece is 57 by 40 inches. This is titled Terminal Bar 2. Oil on linen, 66 by 73. This is 2017. Oil on linen. And again, Jane has got something that she's added in there. Also, well, she did start out with the black ground. It looks like maybe she's kind of stained in kind of dark blue and has built up the color, and I like this palette. She does, like I said, a great job of kind of taking simple abstract forms, just a few of them, putting them together, and then creating this kind of mysterious, tragic narrative. This is nice. We've got kind of a suite of medium-sized pieces, and they're all kind of keyed to a sepia Naples yellow palette. This is titled Employees Only 2. Oil stick on linen. This is from 2000. .50 by 30 inches. Yeah, in certain ways, Jane is like the Edward Hopper of the night. And yeah, if you're out kicking around and going in and out of buildings and things like that around Times Square late at night, you're going to see a lot of lonely, isolated tableaus of human pathos. And there is a nice quality about how the nubby blacks and the pumice and this kind of almost like a sandpaper finish kind of reflects the light or doesn't reflect the light. This is titled Cops in Headlights, 1991, oil on linen. Well, I've been in New York long enough to know that if you see a scene like this, you should be running in the other direction. And Jane is able to really squeeze a lot out of a very simple palette, simple images. Great dynamic composition. She does wonderful things with getting to read the lights and the reflections with a very simple approach. This is 50 by 36. And we're going to end up looking at this. It's titled Witness 2, 1991 to 97. You know, this is great because in a lot of ways, this kind of shows you Jane's engagement with formalist abstraction. Got kind of a minimalist grid, but yet we've got this little figure peeping out. And of course, you're going to wonder about who this is. Also, I like this edge here on the side where the light comes through the blinds. And that's nice too, the kind of splayed out panels. Okay.
It's suddenly very loud in here.
It is very loud, but just yell like you're in Times Square. We caught up with Jane Dickson, and the title of the show is Everything Solid Melts into Air. Is that the... Did you come up with that, or did you borrow it from a poet?
It was a title of a Marshall Berman book about Times Square that I was in, and it's a quote from Lenin, I think.
A quote from Lenin?
Yes, or Marx.
Yeah, either one. Okay.
Sorry. It's an early communist quote.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is kind of the way that people are reevaluating the 80s now. There's a whole thing about the East Village and that whole scene. You were involved with that. I was talking about the fact that you and your husband were involved in the Times Square show, which was 1979, was that?
80.
It was 1980. And in a certain way, that was kind of a harbinger of the East Village thing. How does it feel to kind of be, this is kind of scary, to have gotten to the point in your career where people are now looking at you as a great historical documenter and you're ready for reevaluation?
I wanted, when I started making work about my life and where I was, I thought I want to document the everyday. This is how it is here. I'm living in Times Square. Had a job on the first digital billboard in Times Square as an animator.
Yes, wow.
And so it was every day, but also I knew that the Times Square redevelopment was already planned so that this world that looked kind of like the 40s
That's right.
gone at some point when the city got around and the state got around to doing it, and it took them, we moved there and, well, I started working there in 78, and the city didn't do the demolition till 93 or 4. So it took them a long time, but they did eventually. So I guess I always knew this would become history, and I was looking at the part around where I lived, 8th Avenue, was very 1940s.
Port Authority, the bad end of Times Square.
Well, Port Authority was from the 60s, so that was the newest thing there.
But that's where everybody sort of came in. That's where everybody came in and went around looking for action.
And we lived kitty corner from Port Authority, so we got them fresh off the bus.
And you were there for how long?
Well, I started working there at one Times Square in 78, and I lived and or worked in Times Square till 2008. But
Really?
We actually lived in a loft there from 1980 to 93. So it was 12 or 13 years that we lived there, and we had 2 children there. God help them, they survived.
They'll be tough.
We lived above the playpen and the mailbox.
Okay. Now, this was all before the Disney people moved in. I mean, as nasty as it was, the Disney thing is even more frightening in a certain way. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was a technical question. You know, you've always been working on these kind of nubby surfaces, a lot of black. Can you talk a little bit about how you developed that technique?
Like I said, I worked as an animator on the first digital light board.
Yes.
In Times Square, so I was designing images that were made out of glowing lights on a black screen.
To be seen at night, mostly.
Right, and even if they were seen in the day, it was a black screen with these bright lights. And I thought this was not going to have any influence on my artwork. But then I found myself going home and painting on like garbage bags or trying to recreate light out of darkness. And I feel like all of my work since has been about artificial light. And I don't know why I like rough surfaces, but I do.
Did you spend a lot of time staying up late at Times Square? I mean,
yeah, I worked the night shift on weekends, so that was my introduction. And like one of the first dates I went on with Charlie, he came to pick me up when the sign would close at midnight on Saturday, and I said, my boss gave me passes to this place that we're doing an exchange and advertising for. Let's check it out. It's called Studio 54.
Oh, okay.
So it was, you know, it was a intense scene.
Sounds like a lot of fun. And Jenny Holzer was wasn't she one of the first people that was working on the side, at least artists that they brought in to kind of...
I made that happen.
You made it happen.
Yes, when we did the Times Square show, I persuaded my boss to let me run a public service announcement ad for the Times Square show. And because I was programming the sign, I had it run every 20 minutes for the whole month. So I gave us a lot of free advertising. And as part of that, we had talked to the Public Art Fund, and Jane Dickson said, I could get money to do an artist series if you could get your boss to let us have access to it. And I said, I will do that if I get to pick the artist for the first year, because I know all these young artists that are awesome that you never heard of. Like Jenny Holzer was making her art on paper cups
Sure.
at the time. She had never touched a sign or thought about a sign. Ditto Keith Haring. It was like his first public project. I had met Keith at the Times Square show. Jenny I already knew from Collab. You know, and I also brought David Hammonds on and Crash. It was a star-studded first season. And I did a piece on it.
Yeah, in certain ways it was kind of the end of a particular era, the whole Soho thing, and the beginning of something new, which was the East Village and kind of the post-punk sensibility.
But it was also the beginning of digital public art, and it led to me at doing, you know, a fair amount. Like they just took it down, but there was a Martin Wong sign piece up, and
okay.
Then
Love Martin.
I proposed, because of the Billboard project, I was on the board at the Public Art Fund, and one day the Department of Transportation came in and said, we want to have an artist in residence. And everyone's like, well, who should we ask? And I went, I don't know, Martin's doing sign language.
Sure.
Which is a dumb pun, but his whole thing of doing sign language is kind of a dumb pun already, because obviously deaf people can read English. They don't need stop spelled out in. So anyway, it was really funny that it ended up in this show here, because I was like, it's another piece. I felt like this was part of my Collab
extended family.
Yes, that I always wanted to share the wealth just for the fun of it. You know, it was like Stone Soup.
Right, plug in the cables and see where the sparks start to fly.
Exactly.
Okay,
sort
Jane.
of like what you're doing.
I'm trying. Thanks, Jane Dickson, for the show. And what was the title again? Everything that is solid
All that is solid melts into air.
melts into air.
Because all of this is gone.
That's right. It's all been Disneyified.
I don't know that it melted into air. It probably just slumped into
It's
it.
probably stuck in storage
dumpster.
somewhere in New Jersey.
Right.
All right. Thanks, Jane. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Bye.
James Kalm reporting on Jane Dickson. All that is solid melts into air. Here at James Fuentes, 55 Delancey Street. This is the closing 5 minutes of the show. You can like this, share, recommend it to your friends, and subscribe. And you can leave your thoughts, ideas, criticisms, reviews, and suggestions below. But we do ask you to say thank you, Kate.
Like a summer to that, I'm not a sucker. Yeah, hard on my back at the rocker. Already know like the buzz of ramming for this. Everybody's about to win.
Meanwhile, dropping another freestyle. Never seen now, tell me what you see now. Rocking the world when I'm rocking the town. Every little step, call myself Bobby Brown.
You know what I see now, Got a shop in the bag like
Thank
Snapchat.
you, thank you.
I'm going to Shot Town. Everybody getting the money to get wild. Fuck it, and everybody